Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge and our last Blitzkrieg campaign playthrough. Now we have reached the beginning of the 21st of December turn, roughly a third of the way through the whole campaign scenario. And I think we've reached a point where it kind of makes sense to go ahead and wrap up this playthrough for a number of reasons. I've had a fairly long break in time with me being able to get back with the game, and one of the big dangers of any long extended breaks is of course losing momentum, and of course the work situation over the last couple months has really cut down my ability to spend time with the game, which doesn't help. So I kind of feel that momentum has kind of slipped away. But more importantly than that is we've also reached a point where I really think the German chances for victory are extremely remote at this point. I wouldn't say they're totally gone, but it's going to take almost a miracle for them to achieve their sudden death victory conditions, let alone the conventional victory conditions at the end of the campaign. And we'll take a look at the map here. We'll just kind of review where things stand, and I'll talk about some of what I think were some of the more important factors in this playthrough as the game unfolded here momentarily. But another reason for bringing the playthrough to an end is I do think it's achieved much of the objectives that I had in mind when I originally started this playthrough last year, and that primarily was to bring more attention to the Battalion Combat Series in general, and specifically last Blitzkrieg. This is a fantastic game, and I wanted those of you out there that maybe have heard of BCS but were kind of unsure about it to get a chance to really see what the system is, how it works, and what it's capable of. And I think over the past, oh gosh, probably 30 plus hours, maybe 40 hours of video playthrough, I think we've accomplished that. So let's go ahead and take a look and see how things stand on the map here at the beginning of the 21st of December. We'll start out by taking a look at the current status of the victory point hexes for both sides. And if you recall, I've been marking those the last couple of days with six-sided dice. The red dice indicate victory point hexes that would give the Germans a victory point, and blue dice for the Americans. And we'll start up here in the north. You can see the Germans have two victory point hexes in their control right now. They have the Twin Villages out here to the east, and then they also have Camp Delsenborn in their control. As we head out further to the west, you see the Americans with Malmedy, Stavelot, and Trois Ponts in their control, as well as right here, this is Vilsholm, although that, as you can see, is about to fall back into the control of the Germans. So I don't know how much longer the Americans are going to retain control of Vilsholm there. Further to the west, the Germans have just taken control of Parker's Crossroads, and then as we continue south, they've seized Houffalize. The Americans still hold Bastogne there with the 101st in control, and then down here, Martelange, and then as we come across to the east, Ettelbruck is still in American hands. So if you're keeping score at home, you can see there are 4 German victory point hexes. They would score points 4 to 7 for the Americans, although, again, Vilsholm there is very likely to fall to the Germans here on this turn, which make it more of a 6 to 4. Still an advantage to the Americans. Most of the German victory point hexes still lie farther out here to the west. And as we take a look at the board state here momentarily, you'll see why I doubt the Germans have much of a chance to take a lot of those victory point hexes out there. Let's go ahead and we'll just work our way down from the north sector down to the south sector. Now here in the north, the Germans had a fair amount of success. The initial front lines were down here by Losheimer Graben, and they've been able to kind of push through the 99th Infantry Division, very heavily damaging that and actually forcing the headquarters to displace all the way back up here to the northwest, north of Sauerbrot here. They've largely overrun the Elsenborn Ridge area, and in addition to mauling 99th Infantry Division, they've got 2nd Infantry Division here in a bit of a sack, although they just can't quite close the bag on the large grouping of the division here to the east. However, 9th Infantry Division is on the scene, and just within the last day, they've begun to make a bit of a counterattack here against the 326th Volksgrenadier, way up at the north end of the map. They've managed to retake Hofen here, and 326th, it's only part of the division to begin with, and it's a weak division at that. So 326th is going to need some help here from its neighbor, the 277th, as 9th Infantry Division continues to push and start to apply some pressure. That in turn is going to ease up some of the pressure here on 2nd Infantry Division. But you can see 1st SS, at least minus Kampfgruppe Piper, has in fact pushed up here to the north. They are trying desperately now to collapse the left flank of 1st Infantry Division, get to this road, and really kind of disrupt this whole northern shoulder to the American position. However, that's going to be a fairly difficult task. 1st Infantry Division is a good division. It's a big division. They are dug in, and 1st SS here is lacking all of the armor and heavy equipment, which they've given to Piper, who has gone off further to the west. As we move a little further to the west, you can see here's 1st SS up here. Here's 12th SS Panzer Division, one of the most powerful formations in the entire game, and they are running head-on into 1st Infantry Division, or rather the western half of 1st Infantry Division here, right in the Malmedy area. Now, can 12th SS push its way through 1st Infantry? Probably, but it's going to be a grinding attack that's going to attrit the division here to some degree. And 1st Infantry, again, it's a big formation. It's a strong formation. The Americans get lots of replacements, and so while 1st Infantry Division may be pushed back, they certainly are more than capable of counterattacking if necessary. In fact, Combat Command B of 3rd Armored Division just arrived in theater here and launched a small counterattack, which did in fact kind of slam into the left wing of 12th SS here and push them back. So the Americans are not simply in a position where they have to sit there and take it anymore. They are starting to build up some strength in the north here. They've dug in. They've got a fairly well-established front line from the northern shoulder all the way out further west here, and they're starting to punch back here and there at the Germans. And again, attrition favors the Americans in this situation. The Germans have been taking a lot of AV step losses to this point in the battle, and they really, I don't know how much longer they can sustain those types of losses and have any chance of really moving the Americans. In fact, in another couple of days, the Germans may end up having to worry more about keeping the Americans at bay versus pushing them back. But I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility of the Germans managing to take Malmedy here from the Americans. It's probably likely, I would say, but it may take another 2-3 days unless the Germans get very lucky with their attacks in this area. You can see the aforementioned Combat Command B. It's not a very big formation, just these 3 battalion-sized task forces, but it has aggressively pushed down here. That's kind of been a theme, I think, with the American armored formations in this game, is the aggressive use of them, and it seems to have worked out to the Americans' advantage, I think. They have, again, been able to inflict more losses than the Germans, I think, would have liked on the German AV units in the game. They are trying to cut their way down to the cutoff 106th and CCB of the 9th. You can see those two, the kind of the remnants of those formations right here, kind of trapped, but they're only a few miles from some relief here. And despite all of the punishment that 106th Infantry Division has taken, it is still on the map. It's still in the way. It's still causing some issues for the Germans. They would like to have had this area cleared up in the Saint-Vite area just in general. If we pull back a little bit further here, you can see Saint-Vite here. This is a key road junction for the Germans, and thus it's important for the Americans to hold on as long as possible. The Germans were able to take Saint-Vite from the south fairly early on, but they've still had some difficulties in clearing up the American presence in this area. And that, of course, has led to some difficulties for the Germans and not allowed them to get as far to the west as they would like, or as they need to be by this point in the game. But as we come back up here, you can see the 1st Infantry Division is well established here, and then they are tied in immediately with the 30th Infantry Division, which takes us all the way out here to the Somme River and Trois Ponts area here. It's going to take an effort on the part of the Germans to either punch through or push 30th Infantry aside. Do they have the firepower to do it? Yeah, probably. They still have a couple of SS Panzer divisions and a fresh Panzer Grenadier division, but again, those two SS Panzer divisions don't need to be fighting 30th Infantry. They need to be driving for the Meuse off to the west here. So the Americans do have them fighting in this area. They've succeeded in their objectives. Now, as we continue to move further to the west, we get all the way out to the most westward penetration of the Germans so far, and that is out here at Parker's Crossroads. We have the 116th Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr sort of next to one another. They're not in a bad position, if I'm honest. The major issue for 116th Panzer is they're now facing an 82nd Airborne Division that is dug in front of them, with the rest of the 3rd Armored Division, minus CCB, which is off to the east there in the 1st Infantry Division sector, just to their west. So again, can 116th Panzer push their way through 82nd Airborne? Yeah, probably, but it's going to chew them up in the process, and they're also going to have to deal with an American Armored Division just to their west in the process. Now, Panzer Lehr is in a little bit better situation right now, because up this road here, all they have are the remnants of 7th Armored Division, which, in my opinion, is probably the MVP for the Americans in this particular playthrough. The division took a pounding, but they really tied up the Germans for a couple of days, slowed them down, and inflicted a number of losses on their AV units. But behind 7th Armored Division, we have 84th Infantry Division that is just coming in here from the north. And once that infantry division comes in, they'll be able to tie in to the western flank of 30th Infantry Division and fill in this gap between 82nd and 30th, allowing 7th Armored Division to finally fully break contact. You give 7th Armored Division a couple of days to rest and regroup behind that front line, they will be built back up to a strength where they will be able to come back and start counterattacking the Germans. So Lehr by itself, they may be able to make a little more progress here, but I don't see them getting much past Werbemont before they again bog down. And again, 116th Panzer, it's going to be a slow grind for them, which is the last thing the Germans need at this point in the battle. Coming due south of 116th Panzer along the main highway here, you see the bridge here blown at Houffalize, which in retrospect I probably would have been better off using the last Greif team I had to try to keep this bridge intact. This is actually a pretty important bridge for the Germans, just in terms of not only tactical flexibility on their options they'll have in continuing to push westward, but also with their logistics and their MSR organization. So again, an important bridge for the Germans, which I allowed to get blown there, but we've left sort of the area of the best German successes in the game so far, and I think from here on out it gets pretty ugly for the Germans. You can see 2nd Panzer Division here. They started off the battle pretty well. They seized Clairvaux early on. They had a shot to get into Bastogne even on the 17th before the 101st Airborne arrived. But when that failed to materialize, things have kind of gone downhill for 2nd Panzer in a big way. As a matter of fact, if you look at them right now, they actually are cut off. They do not have a valid MSR. Now, it's probably not going to stay that way for long. The Germans have, they basically have to get Team Cherry here and the 1st of the 401st Glider Battalion off of this road out of Noville back towards the southeast here in order to clear up the MSR for 2nd Panzer. And that's a doable task for this day, but again, it's far from a given. So we may end up seeing 2nd Panzer Division basically stuck here for an entire day, making no progress. And that's important because today's the 21st of December, and I've alluded to it, I think, in some earlier episodes, but the 22nd of December is when the Americans get just an enormous number of reinforcements. In fact, let me tell you what they get. This is not the 21st, but this will be the turn after this upcoming turn. The Americans are scheduled to get 22 artillery asset points. Yes, 22, which they will divvy out among all of their formations, and those are artillery points that are going to be shooting up Germans every single turn from here on out through the end of the game. They're also going to get the 29th Infantry Regiment. They're going to get the 5th Infantry Division, the 29th Commonwealth Armored Brigade, the 4th Armored Cavalry Group, the 80th Infantry Division, the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, the 2nd Armored Division, the 75th Infantry Division, the 509th Airborne Infantry Battalion, and the 517th Airborne Infantry Regiment. Now, most of those units are part of Patton's 3rd Army, and they will be coming on the southern edge of the map. So it's not going to affect the northern flank that we've looked at so far, but what it's going to do is have a big impact here in this Bastogne area, as well as further off to the east in 7th Army's sector. I do think 2nd Panzer Division underperformed in this particular playthrough, although that's far from the case in every game. I've seen 2nd Panzer really kind of run wild at times. But 101st Airborne Division is in a good situation. They are dug in with a defense in depth, and with 2nd Panzer Division cut off today and perhaps even for the next couple of days, the situation looks really bad here for the Germans out in the south. Now they've got 26th Volksgrenadier kind of moving up, 150th Panzer Brigade, just a small little formation here of 3 battalion-sized units. They're not bad units, they're not great, but they certainly aren't going to be doing much on their own. 26th is one of the better German infantry formations, but their fatigue level is 4 right now, so they are exhausted. That's going to make it very difficult for them to achieve even a single full activation. They're looking at maybe doing 1 partial activation from here on out until they can get their fatigue level reduced. In order to do that, they need to do a recovery activation, which means they're just going to be sitting on their hands for however many days until they can get the fatigue level down to a more manageable level. Again, all of this does not bode well for the German effort here in the south. 5th Fallschirmjäger, relatively fresh, haven't been heavily engaged thus far in the battle, and they do have an 88 battalion in support as well as their own Stuck battalion, but they're going to be facing at least a couple of divisions from Patton's 3rd Army. And as you can see, they're fairly spread out right now. I just don't think the Germans have what they need in this Bastogne sector to really hold off the Americans, let alone continue to try to drive to the west, which means really the Germans' only hope right now is going to rely on what they can achieve on the northern half of the battlefield. And as we've seen there, the Americans are getting a fairly well-established line dug in with some armor support. So again, another reason why I really don't think the Germans are in a very good spot at this particular point in the campaign. Now moving east from the Bastogne sector here in the south, we'll come back here into the 7th Army sector, and you can see they still have 3 Volksgrenadier formations, generally still on the attack here against the American defenders. 4th Infantry Division for the Americans is in a bit of a tough spot, but you know, they've been in a tight spot since this battle began, and the German 212th just really hasn't been able to exploit that. Even if the Germans are continuing to attack and manage to take this victory point hex and this victory point hex, I just don't see them being able to keep them through really even the 26th, let alone the end of the campaign, given the large number of American reinforcements that are going to be coming onto the map here in this area. So in the next 2 days, these formations are all going to have to switch over to a defensive mindset for the Germans. They will likely end up having to pull back north of the Sauer River here and just try to hold on to this river line and prevent the Americans from driving north here, especially up the Skyline Drive, and potentially cutting off all of these German formations out to the west. There are a few American victory point hexes in this area here, so the Americans will be making a concerted effort to try and get as far north back here along really the base of the German salient here. Not only to cut off the Germans, but also to grab those victory points for the end of the game. Now, why do I think the game sort of ended up like it did? Well, let's talk about some of what I consider to be the more decisive moments or factors in the playthrough. Well, I'd have to say that I think one of the biggest factors in the game that really went against the Germans was just the awful fatigue rolls that they suffered over the first couple of days in the campaign. I've played the campaign game a number of times now, and I have not seen fatigue rolls that bad for the Germans like that. And the fact that those fatigue rolls were so bad so early has kind of a knock-on effect, because every fatigue level that a formation has, that's going to apply a -1 to their snafu roll, which means it makes it that much more difficult for them to achieve those full activations, which the Germans need. So, you know, you can't just say, well, we're 6 days into the battle, of course we would expect our formations to have fatigue levels of 3 or a few of them with 4. Sure, you're going to expect that, but when you get them at fatigue level 3 or fatigue level 2 by the 2nd or 3rd day of the battle, that's a little bit early, and it's going to affect what happens in a fairly dramatic fashion. On the subject of snafu rolls, the Germans again didn't have particularly good luck with those. Even as late as the last couple of days, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, the 2nd and 9th SS divisions here that came on map, they were getting just awful activations. In fact, I think there was a turn where the 2 formations combined had a grand total of 2 partial activations, which just is not going to get the job done. By this point, even with the lack of breakthrough that the Germans have here in the north, by this point, normally these 2 divisions are at least on the Somme River here, and they're within striking distance of punching through and getting off the map at the sudden death victory, or they're able to come out here and support the leading Panzer divisions and continuing to punch through whatever defenses the Americans have out here and start grabbing these victory point hexes and maybe even crossing the Meuse way out in the west. But as you can see, they are barely up to Saint-Vite at this point, so they are way behind schedule. And again, the weather, rolling for the variable weather, Couple of bad turns of mud, which really does hurt both of those divisions, given the number of truck type movement units that they have in them. The another factor that I think really kind of played against the Germans was the fact that the Americans in the north were able to get some really good activations early on by 30th Infantry Division and 1st Infantry Division. That allowed them to kind of scoot on down through Spa here and jump into a nice position right here faster than I've seen them do in a lot of games. I would say more often than not, I see the Germans reach at least to Spa here in the north, and Spa is right up there, and you can see the victory point exit is right there. So it's usually a much more tense game for the Americans as they are defending in this area versus well forward here. So can I say the Germans had bad luck this game? Yeah, that's a factor, but that's, again, that could easily happen to the other side as well. If you remember early on, we had the 116th Panzer. After they crossed here, they decided, instead of pursuing immediately westward or driving westward, they decided to come around and take Saint-Vit from the southwest. It worked in that they took Saint-Vit, but may it not have worked out better for the Germans in the long run if they had instead just bolted directly to the west before any American strength could be built up out there. They, you know, may have been able to reach, certainly they would have taken probably Parker's Crossroads. They may have been able to get as far west as La Roche and Ardennes, certainly before 3rd Armored Division shows up. And beyond that, things really kind of open up once you get across the Ourthe River here. That's the last major barrier to the Germans before they reach the Meuse out in the west. And that's their sudden death victory objective out there. So down here in the south, again, we talked about it a little bit in the Bastogne area. 2nd Panzer Division really kind of got off to a great start and then really fell apart. 26th Volksgrenadier, they simply were a victim of fatigue rolls. They've got a fatigue level of 4, which is not then. They were at fatigue level 4, I think, what, 2-3 turns ago. So really wretched fatigue rolls for the 26th Volksgrenadier meant that they were not able to move as quickly or as far as the Germans really needed them to. So I would, as the Germans, I don't know that I would necessarily concede at this point, but again, like I said, it probably would take a miracle for the Germans to pull out any kind of victory in this particular campaign playthrough. But that's the beauty of BCS and last Blitzkrieg. The replayability factor in this game is just off the charts. And I'll talk about BCS and last Blitzkrieg sort of in general here for a couple of minutes before we wrap this up. Now, BCS is one of the most innovative game systems I've seen come out in the last couple of decades easily. It is not a very difficult system, and I hope those of you that were unfamiliar with it prior to watching this playthrough kind of realize that now. But it's very different. There's a lot of things in here that aren't necessarily complex, but they are sort of out of the box, or they're not what you would find in a traditional hex encounter operational level war game. And I think because of that, it can be a little hard to wrap your head around some things at first. But I certainly consider BCS to be maybe a medium complexity war game, but it gives you the right results, the right feeling. I think it has you focusing on what you should be focusing on and thinking in terms that you should be thinking in. Rather, you're thinking in terms of divisional integrity. You're looking at objectives for your division for that day, and of course tying that in with the neighboring formations so that you can avoid any of the coordination difficulties and trying to keep your snafu going. You're looking at where to place your supply routes. A lot of stuff is abstracted, but I think it's a testament to the strength of the design that less is more in BCS. Dean has really stripped out a lot of the details and abstracted a lot of things, but in so doing, I think he's created a better, more interesting, and maybe more, I don't say accurate, look at operational level warfare here in the Second World War than you find in a lot of the other operational level games out there. This particular game, Last Blitzkrieg, is in my top 10 of all-time games. I will be more than happy to sit down and play a game of this anytime, anywhere. And that's because despite having played as many games of this as I have, every game is different. Every game plays out differently because of primarily the snafu rolls. You never know if a division is going to get to activate on a particular day, and if so, how far it's going to go. Is it going to get a partial activation? Is it going to get a full activation? Is it going to be able to get a second activation? I also like the way BCS differentiates your armored assets from your infantry assets. They were historically used in different roles, and they were used different ways. They engaged the enemy differently, and you see that in the 3 different types of combat resolution tables. Also, anyone who thinks they're going to drive an armored division or a Panzer Division into a location and have them sit there and hold it like you would expect an infantry division to do is in for kind of a rude awakening, I think. Now, it's true the Germans do have an advantage in their individual armored units. They usually have the higher armor values, and they have good action ratings, which are going to give them the advantage against the Americans on the engagement table most of the time. But the Americans, again, they have numbers and they have the replacements to sustain an attritional battle. So even if the American armor units are engaging the German panzer units and they're losing 2 steps to 1 or 3 steps to 1, that's still an acceptable exchange ratio for them. Because over the course of a few days, that German Panzer Division is just simply going to get worn down to nothing. So I do think this game provides a lot of really interesting challenges for both sides. And it's a very tense game right from the get-go. The Germans are under the clock. They know they're under the clock. Any little setback makes life that much more difficult for them. Whereas on the American side, on December 16th, you're basically just sitting there taking it. And there's very little you can actually do. And for you, you are scrambling just to find any battalion you can to throw in the way of the Germans to slow them down, just even for a turn. Every little bit counts, again, because of that ticking clock, if you will. And it makes for a pretty exciting, pretty tense gaming experience, all the way through, easily the first 7, 8, 9, 10 turns of the campaign. Now, as you get into the later stages of the campaign, once most of the American reinforcements are on the map, and really they've been able to start to deploy their overwhelming power, particularly in artillery, it then becomes more of just kind of a grinding, attritional slugfest. And slowly, at first, the Americans just start chipping away, particularly at the 7th Army formations in the south. The German infantry replacements they just don't have that many, and they really can't afford to kind of waste them on action rating 2 formations when they've got action rating 4 formations that are in just as critical a situation elsewhere on the map. And so, unfortunately, I think the ending of the campaign scenario in Last Blitzkrieg is a little bit anticlimactic, but really the first 10 to 12 turns of this campaign scenario are some of the most fun experiences I've had in gaming, period. So if you haven't tried the game, I strongly recommend it. It plays very well 2-player, but I like it as a 4-player game with 2 Allied and 2 German commanders. Each side can split responsibility for the battlefield into a northern sector and southern sector, and because of the formation activation mechanism, it's very easy to split up the battlefield and to reassign responsibilities as you go through the game. You simply say, these formations are yours, these formations are mine, and more importantly, with 4 players, you can actually kind of speed up play, because as you alternate activations, you can have one side, you have the German side activating a formation in the northern sector, while the other two players in the southern sector have the Americans activate their formation. And then you're just kind of flipping back and forth. It can really kind of reduce the overall gameplay and allow you to get something even as massive as this. You could get this, you could play through a full campaign game somewhere like Consim World Expo or Winterfest, anywhere where you can get 6-7 days and you get 4 experienced players together. That's a fantastic experience. And again, I highly recommend it. So I think that's going to wrap it up for the playthrough here. It's been a bit of a project. It's gone on a lot longer than I expected. Part of that was due to some real-world interference with this, but I think we've shown everybody out there what BCS is capable of, what Last Blitzkrieg is really capable of. And for those of you that have stuck with me throughout the entire playthrough series up to this point, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a little something out of it. And do not fear, this will not be the last of the Last Blitzkrieg content you see on the channel here. In fact, I have plans in the future, not the near future, but this is going to be down the road a ways, but I'll be doing a straight up in-depth comparison between Last Blitzkrieg and the Gauss Wacht am Rhein. That's the Grand Operational Simulation Series game on the Bulge, which covers the same topic at almost the exact same scale. Gauss is a system that has intrigued me for the last couple of years. So once I get to the point where I've been able to get as much time with Wacht am Rhein as I have with Last Blitzkrieg here, I think I'll be in a position to kind of sit down and we're just going to compare the games blow by blow and see if Last Blitzkrieg can remain my personal go-to operational level Bulge game. That's going to do it for today, folks. Once again, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.